Hello, I am Caleb Rourke, 32 years old, a lieutenant in the United States Navy SEALs. I live a disciplined life where every step is carefully calculated. But if you ask me where my heart truly belongs, I'll tell you about a mansion on a cliff in coastal California. It's worth about $50 million, an immense fortune. That place is not just a house, it's my entire world, where my father, Admiral Thomas Rourke, instilled in me the values I carry throughout my life. But let me tell you, this story isn't just about me. It's about family, legacy, and the lessons that shaped who I am today. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The flight from Norfolk Naval Base felt endless, each mile carrying me closer to a reality I wasn't prepared to face. My father was gone. Admiral Thomas Rourke, the man who taught me that honor wasn't just a word but a way of life, had died suddenly of a heart attack 3 days ago. The Pacific Ocean stretched beneath the aircraft's wing like a gray mirror reflecting my grief back at me. As the plane descended toward the coastal California airport, I could see the familiar cliffs where our family estate sat like a fortress overlooking the sea. The morning sunlight filtered through the marine layer, casting ethereal patches of light across the landscape, as if nature itself was painting a picture just for us. The house, with its pale stone walls and soaring windows, was not merely an architectural marvel. It was a symbol of the love and dedication my father built. I rented a car and drove the winding coastal road toward home, but something stopped me from turning through the estate gates. New security cameras perched on the stone pillars like mechanical vultures, and an electronic gate had replaced the old wrought iron one that used to swing open at the touch of a hand. I pulled over at the overlook instead, studying the property that had been in the Rourke family for 3 generations. Something's changed, I muttered to myself, noting the pristine landscaping that seemed too perfect, too controlled. Where were the wild coastal grasses my father loved? Where was the weathered dock where he taught me to tie nautical knots? My phone buzzed. Isabel Vega. The name brought a small smile to my face. Our estate manager and the closest thing to family I had besides my half-brother Mason. If anyone could help me make sense of this homecoming, it would be Isabel. Caleb, her voice carried warmth, tinged with something I couldn't identify. "I'm so sorry about your father. Can we meet? There's a small cafe in town, Marina's. I think we should talk before..." "Before what, Isabel?" A pause stretched between us. "Before tomorrow's funeral. The estate isn't what it used to be, mijo." Marina's cafe sat tucked between a surf shop and an art gallery, the kind of place where locals gathered to escape the tourist crowds. I found Isabel at a corner table, her silver hair pulled back in the same practical bun she'd worn for as long as I can remember. But her usually bright eyes were shadowed with worry. 23 years I've managed that house," she said after we embraced. 23 years I've watched your family, loved your family. But these last few months," she shook her head, stirring her coffee with more force than necessary. "What happened, Isabel? Tell me straight." She glanced around the cafe, then leaned closer. "Your father was sick longer than anyone knew. The medications made him foggy sometimes. And Mason..." She stopped herself, loyalty warring with concern on her weathered face. "Mason what?" "Mason has been very involved in estate matters lately. Very involved." I studied her expression, reading the subtext she couldn't quite voice. Isabel had taught me as a boy that sometimes the most important conversations happened in the silences between words. This was one of those conversations. "I need to see Mason," I said finally.
"He's at the church, arranging things for tomorrow. But Caleb," her hand reached across the table to touch mine, "be careful. The boy you remember, he's different now." That evening, I drove to St. Catherine's by the Sea, the small stone church where generations of Rourkes had been baptized, married, and mourned. Mason stood at the altar speaking with the priest, his gestures animated and proprietary. Even from the back pew, I could see he'd filled out since our last meeting 5 years ago. Designer clothes, expensive watch, the kind of polished appearance that came with success or the illusion of it. "Caleb!" His voice echoed through the sanctuary as he spotted me. "Jesus, look at you, still built like a brick wall." We embraced, but something felt off in the way he held himself, the way his eyes didn't quite meet mine. Mason had always been charming, but there was an edge to it now, a calculation that hadn't been there in our youth. "I'm sorry about Dad. This must be hard on you too." "Yeah, well," Mason's smile flickered. "Life goes on, right? Listen, I've got everything handled for tomorrow. The service, the reception, all of it. You don't need to worry about a thing." The casual dismissal stung. "I'd like to help. This is my father's funeral too." Of course. But you know how Dad was. He liked things done a certain way. I've been here, Caleb. I know what he would have wanted." There it was, subtle but unmistakable. The implication that my absence during Dad's final months somehow disqualified me from understanding his wishes. I bit back my first response, drawing on years of SEAL training to maintain composure under pressure. "I understand you've been taking care of things. I appreciate that. But now I'm home." Mason's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. Right, home. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of California day that made postcards famous. St. Catherine's filled with an impressive crowd. Naval officers in dress whites, local dignitaries, family friends I hadn't seen in years, and what seemed like half the town. My father had touched many lives during his transition from Navy service to civilian success with his shipping company. I delivered the eulogy, speaking of integrity, service, and the legacy of honor Admiral Thomas Rourke had built. The words came easily because they came from truth. My father was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and sharp, piercing eyes. He was a successful businessman, the founder of a renowned shipping firm in California, but what made me respect him wasn't his wealth or fame, it was the way he lived. "A man's worth isn't measured by the money he has," I repeated his favorite maxim to the packed church, "but by what he does when no one is watching." The reception afterwards was held at the Ocean View Country Club, where Dad had been a member for 30 years. I moved through the crowd, accepting condolences and sharing memories, but I kept noticing the way people's eyes would dart to Mason when they thought I wasn't looking. Conversations would pause when I approached, then resume with forced brightness. It was during the toast that Mason dropped his bombshell. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, tapping his wine glass with a silver knife, "I want to thank you all for being here today to honor our father. Thomas Rourke was a great man who believed in legacy, in passing on not just wealth, but wisdom to the next generation." I felt the first stirrings of unease as Mason's gaze found mine across the room. As many of you know, Dad spent his final months putting his affairs in order. He was very clear about his wishes for the estate and the family business. I am honored to say that he entrusted me with carrying on the Rourke name and everything it represents. The room fell silent. I set down my glass, my mind racing to process what I was hearing.
"Dad left me the estate," Mason continued, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "All of it. The house, the land, the business interests. He knew I'd been here, taking care of him, managing things while," his eyes flicked to me again, "while others were serving their country elsewhere." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around the room, faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from surprise to pity to something that looked like embarrassment. Isabel stood near the windows, her face pale with distress. After the reception, I cornered Mason in the club's private study. "What the hell was that about?" I demanded. Mason pulled out a manila folder and handed it to me with what looked like genuine regret. "I'm sorry, Caleb. I didn't want to tell you like that, but people were asking questions." Inside the folder was a will, dated just 6 weeks before Dad's death. My hands remained steady as I read, but my chest tightened with each line. The document was clear. Mason Rourke was to inherit the entire estate, valued at approximately $50 million. There was a small provision for me, a trust fund that would provide a comfortable income, but the house, the land, the legacy I'd grown up believing would be shared between us, all of it went to my younger brother. "This doesn't make sense," I said finally. "Dad always talked about both of us carrying on the family tradition." Mason shrugged, but I caught something flickering in his expression. Guilt? Defensiveness? People change their minds, Caleb, especially when they're facing mortality. Dad needed someone he could count on to be here, to take care of things. You were halfway around the world most of the time. The accusation stung because it held enough truth to bite. My SEAL career had indeed kept me away for long stretches. Deployments, training missions, the demands of special operations, they'd all taken precedence over family visits. When did he sign this? December 15th. His lawyer came to the house. Dad was very clear about what he wanted. December 15th. I'd been in Syria then, part of a mission I couldn't discuss even now. While I was serving my country, my father was apparently writing me out of his will. As we talked, I noticed Captain James Morrison, one of Dad's old Navy friends, hovering near the door. When Mason excused himself to speak with other guests, Morrison approached me. "Son, I've known your father for 40 years, served with him in the Persian Gulf. This," he gestured vaguely toward where Mason stood charming a group of local businessmen, "this wasn't the Admiral's plan. I'm sure of it." "What do you mean?" Morrison glanced around, then leaned closer. "Your dad talked about you boys differently. Always said you were his anchor and Mason was his sail. That you'd balance each other out, keep the family strong together. He wouldn't have cut you out, not the Thomas Rourke I knew." The next morning, I drove to the estate with a strange mix of grief and determination churning in my chest. I needed to see the house, to walk through the rooms where I'd grown up, to feel some connection to the father I'd lost. More than that, I needed to understand what had really happened in those final months. The electronic gates stood closed when I arrived. I pressed the intercom button and waited. "Yeah?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional. "Caleb Rourke. I'm here to see the house." A pause. "Hold on." Minutes passed before Mason's voice crackled through the speaker. "Hey, Caleb. Look, now's not a good time. I've got contractors here, insurance people, lots of stuff to sort through." "I just want to see the house, Mason. Walk through Dad's study, maybe." "I get it, believe me, but the property isn't your concern anymore. Once I get everything organized, maybe we can arrange a visit." The casual dismissal sent ice through my veins. "Open the gate, Mason." Another pause. "I'm sorry, Caleb. Not today." Through the bars, I could see him standing on the main balcony, arms crossed, watching me with what looked like satisfaction. 2 security guards flanked the gate, men I didn't recognize, clearly not locals. I gripped the steering wheel and forced myself to breathe. Years of SEAL training had taught me to compartmentalize emotion, to think tactically, even under stress. This wasn't just grief or family dysfunction. This was active exclusion from what should have been my home, too. "This isn't over," I called up to the balcony. Mason shrugged and walked inside. That evening, Isabel called. "Can you meet me? Tonight, the old marina where your father kept his sailboat. There are things you need to know that Mason wouldn't want you to hear." The marina was quiet at 10 p.m., boats creaking gently at their moorings, the sound of waves lapping against hulls, creating a peaceful rhythm that contradicted the tension I felt. Isabel waited at the end of the dock where Dad's sailboat, Legacy, used to be moored. The slip was empty now. He sold her, Isabel said, following my gaze. Last month. Said there was no point keeping a boat no one would use. We sat on a bench overlooking the harbor. In the moonlight, Isabel looked older, more fragile than I'd ever seen her before. I said, "Tell me what happened." She took a deep breath. "Your father was proud, Caleb. Even when the medications made him confused, even when he started forgetting things, he didn't want anyone to know how bad it was getting. Mason saw an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" "The kind where a sick old man signs papers he might not fully understand, where lawyers visit the house when the patient is heavily medicated, where long-time staff members get dismissed if they ask too many questions." My hands clenched. "You're saying Mason manipulated Dad into changing the will?" "I'm saying your father loved both his sons equally until the day he died. What happened after that?" She shook her head. "I kept copies, Caleb. Financial records, correspondence, anything I thought might be important. Your father was a meticulous man. He'd want someone to know the truth." She handed me a manila envelope. "There's a lawyer in town, Evelyn Sharp. She used to be military legal before going civilian. Your father mentioned her once, said she was someone who understood honor. If anyone can help you, it's her." The documents Isabel had given me painted a disturbing picture. Bank records showed large transfers from the estate accounts to Mason's personal holdings. Email printouts revealed correspondence with lawyers I'd never heard of, discussing expedited estate planning and incapacity protocols. Most damning were the handwritten notes in Isabel's careful script, documenting dates when Mason brought visitors to see Dad, always when the Admiral was on his heaviest pain medications. I spent the night in a waterfront hotel, studying the papers and trying to piece together a timeline. The picture that emerged made my jaw clench with suppressed rage. This wasn't just manipulation, it was systematic exploitation of a dying man's vulnerability. The next morning, I called Evelyn Sharp's office. Her secretary scheduled me for that afternoon.
Sharp examined each paper with the intensity of a forensic analyst. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. "Mr. Rourke, what you're describing sounds like undue influence at minimum, possibly outright fraud, but proving it in court will require more than suspicious circumstances and convenient timing. What do we need?" "Evidence. Original documents. Testimony from people who witnessed your father's mental state during the relevant time period. Medical records showing his capacity, or lack thereof." She paused. "Are you prepared for a fight? Because challenging a will, especially one this large, means war. Your brother won't go quietly." I thought of Mason's smirk from the balcony. The casual dismissal, the locked gates keeping me from my own childhood home. "I'm a Navy SEAL, Miss Sharp. I don't go quietly either." Her smile was sharp as her name. "Good. Then let's get to work." Over the next week, Evelyn and I began constructing our case like a military operation. She handled the legal research and document analysis, while I reached out to my network for support. The first call was to Lieutenant Sam Ortega, my teammate and closest friend in the SEAL community. "Rourke, you bastard." Sam's voice crackled through my phone. "I heard about your father. Sorry, man." "Thanks, Sam. Listen, I need a favor. Off the books." "Name it." "Background check on my brother. Financial records, business dealings, anything that might show motive for what he's done." Sam was quiet for a moment. "That serious?" "That's serious." "Give me 48 hours. While Sam worked his contacts in the intelligence community, Evelyn filed preliminary motions to freeze the estate's assets, preventing Mason from liquidating or transferring anything further. The legal papers were served at the estate on a Thursday morning. By noon, my phone was ringing. "You son of a bitch." Mason's voice was tight with fury. "Are you really going to do this, drag Dad's name through the mud because you can't accept his decision?" "I'm going to find out the truth," I replied calmly. "If Dad really wanted to cut me out, there'll be evidence of that. Real evidence, not just convenient paperwork signed when he was drugged up on painkillers." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then prove it. Open the estate to investigation. Let me see Dad's medical records, his correspondence, his real final wishes." Mason's laugh was bitter. "You're going to destroy this family over money, Caleb. Is that what your precious honor is worth?" The accusation hit home, but I pushed the doubt aside. This wasn't about money. It was about truth, about the kind of man my father really was, about protecting his legacy from someone who would exploit his final weakness. Honor means doing what's right, even when it's hard. Mason hung up. That afternoon, Sam called back with results that confirmed my worst suspicions. Mason's tech ventures were failing spectacularly, hemorrhaging investor money at an alarming rate. His personal debts exceeded $2 million, with creditors circling and bankruptcy looming as a distinct possibility. Your brother needed that inheritance. Without it, he was looking at financial ruin within 6 months. That's a hell of a motive for manipulation. I shared Sam's findings with Evelyn, who nodded grimly. Desperation makes people do terrible things, but desperation also makes them careless. We'll find the proof we need. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Detective Ray Hollister called my hotel room. "Mr. Rourke, this is Detective Hollister, Monterey County Sheriff's Department. I wonder if we might have a conversation about your father's estate." We met at a diner near the courthouse. Hollister was a weathered man in his 50s, with tired eyes, and the patient demeanor of someone who'd seen every variety of human greed.
"I've been looking into some suspicious property transfers in the county," he said over coffee. "Your brother's name came up in connection with several quick sales of valuable assets, always to buyers who paid cash and didn't ask many questions." "What kind of assets?" "Art, antiques, boats, the kind of things wealthy families accumulate over generations. Things that belonged to your father but somehow ended up being sold by your brother weeks before the old man died." My grip tightened on the coffee cup. He was liquidating Dad's collection while Dad was still alive? "Looks that way. Problem is, unless someone files a complaint, it's hard to prove theft. Family members have access, power of attorney, all kinds of legal cover." Hollister studied my face. "But if you could provide evidence that your father didn't authorize those sales, what would you need? Documentation? Witnesses? Something that shows your father's true mental state and intentions during his final months." He leaned forward. "I knew your dad, Mr. Rourke. Knew him for 20 years. The Thomas Rourke I remember wouldn't have authorized the sale of his Navy memorabilia collection. That was his pride and joy." I thought of Dad's study, lined with commendations and photographs from his naval career. The idea of Mason selling those treasures to cover his debts made my stomach turn. "Help me get into that house," I told Hollister, "and I'll get you the evidence you need." The detective smiled for the first time since we'd met. "Now you're talking like a SEAL. Let's see what we can do." As I walked back to my hotel, I felt the familiar sensation of a mission crystallizing into focus. The objective was clear: expose Mason's fraud and reclaim Dad's true legacy. The enemy was identified: a desperate man who'd betrayed family trust for financial gain. The strategy was forming: legal pressure combined with investigative precision, using every resource and contact at my disposal. Mason had made one critical mistake. He underestimated his older brother. I wasn't just some grieving son he could manipulate and dismiss. I was a Navy SEAL with 20 years of training in strategic warfare, and now I was bringing those skills to bear on the most important mission of my life. The battle for the Rourke legacy was just beginning. Sam's intelligence proved devastating. Mason's tech ventures were hemorrhaging money. 3 failed startups, $2 million in personal debt, bankruptcy proceedings imminent without the estate's infusion. Evelyn used this ammunition to petition for an emergency asset freeze, arguing Mason's desperation provided clear motive for manipulation. The court granted our motion on a Tuesday morning. By afternoon, Mason confronted me outside the courthouse, his polished facade cracking. "You're destroying everything Dad built. This family, this legacy. You're tearing it apart over your wounded pride." I remained calm, drawing on SEAL discipline. "I'm protecting what Dad really wanted. There's a difference." "You self-righteous bastard. You think your uniform makes you better than me?" Before I could respond, Detective Hollister appeared beside us. "Mr. Rourke, both of you, might I suggest taking this conversation somewhere more private?" Mason released my arm, smoothing his jacket. "This isn't over." "No, it's not," I agreed quietly. Hollister waited until Mason left. "Interesting timing, that asset freeze. Seems your brother had several large transactions scheduled for this week. Art auctions, property sales, all canceled now. You think he was liquidating everything?" "I think a desperate man does desperate things, but proving it requires evidence from inside that house." I called Mason that evening, proposing a truce meeting at the estate. "We need to talk like brothers, not through lawyers." Surprisingly, he agreed. The gates opened for the first time since my return. I drove up the familiar circular drive, memories flooding back, learning to ride my bike on this gravel, Dad teaching me to salute by the flagpole, family barbecues on the back terrace. Mason met me at the front door, attempting his old charm. "Look, Caleb, maybe we can work something out. Dad left provisions for you." "I'd like to see his study," I interrupted. Sure, but first, let's grab a drink. Talk this through like adults." While Mason poured whiskey in the living room, I excused myself. Military training had taught me to memorize building layouts, and this house held no secrets from me. Dad's study was locked, but I knew where he kept the spare key, behind his Naval Academy graduation photo. Inside, everything felt wrong. Dad's desk was too clean, his personal items rearranged. The safe behind his commendation plaque stood slightly ajar. Inside, I found a USB drive and several handwritten letters in Dad's careful script. "What the hell are you doing?" I turned to find Mason in the doorway, his face flushed with rage. "Finding the truth," I said, pocketing the drive. "Get out! Get out now before I call security." "Your security can try," I said, moving past him, "but they'll have to explain to the police why they're assaulting a Navy officer investigating fraud." Mason's hands shook as I walked to my car. The real battle was just beginning. Evelyn's hands trembled as she examined the USB contents. "Caleb, this changes everything." The drive contained the original trust documents, dated 6 months before Dad's death, long before his mental decline. The estate was to be split equally between Mason and me, with a substantial portion dedicated to a veterans charity Dad wanted to establish. "This is notarized, witnessed, completely legitimate," Evelyn said. "Mason's will is a forgery." Dad's letters were even more damning. Written during lucid moments, they expressed concern about Mason's financial troubles and suspicious behavior. One passage made my chest tighten. "I fear my younger son's desperation may lead him down a dark path. Caleb, if something happens to me, protect the family name. Protect your brother from himself." Hollister confirmed Mason's lawyer was under investigation for similar estate fraud in 3 other cases. The pattern was clear. Target wealthy, elderly clients, exploit moments of vulnerability, forge documents during medical crises. "We have enough to destroy him in court," Evelyn said. "But Caleb," she studied my face, "your father's last letter asks you to protect Mason. What will you do with that?" I stared at Dad's handwriting, feeling the weight of his final request. Justice demanded Mason pay for his crimes. Love demanded I find another way. The courtroom was packed. Evelyn systematically dismantled Mason's case, presenting the original trust, exposing his lawyer's criminal history, demonstrating the suspicious timing of every document Mason claimed Dad had signed. Under cross-examination, Mason's composure cracked completely. "He was my father, too. I took care of him while Caleb played soldier around the world. You deserved what he freely gave," Evelyn cut him off. "Not what you stole through manipulation and fraud." The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. The will presented by Mason Rourke is hereby declared fraudulent and void. The original trust documents shall govern estate distribution. Mason stared at me as the gavel fell, his face a mask of defeat and rage. "You've destroyed everything," he whispered. "No," I said quietly. "I've saved it." At dawn, I walked the estate grounds alone. Ocean breeze carrying the salt scent that meant home. Isabel found me by Dad's memorial garden, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "He would be proud," she said simply. "Would he? I just sent my brother into exile." "You honored his wishes. The estate, the charity, the legacy he wanted. It's all protected now."
Sam arrived that afternoon, grinning as he surveyed the property. "Mission accomplished, sailor." Evelyn finalized the legal transfers, ensuring the Veterans Charity would receive its intended funding. The estate would remain in family hands, but as Dad intended, a legacy of service, not selfishness. That evening, I wrote Mason a letter. "The door remains open when you're ready to honor Dad's memory instead of exploiting it. Family isn't about inheritance. It's about integrity." I never sent it. Some lessons must be learned the hard way. Standing on the cliff where my father taught me to read the stars, I understood his final gift wasn't the estate or the money. It was the choice between vengeance and honor, between destroying my brother and believing he might someday find his way back to the man Dad hoped he could become. The Pacific stretched endlessly before me, full of promise and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, the Rourke legacy was secure.
Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.